Welcome to The World This Week. I'll look back at the past 7 days of world news. A tough task for me alone, so I'm delighted to introduce to you our esteemed panel of guests. And this is not in order of preference. Everybody here is great. By satellite, we have Christopher Dickey, foreign editor of the Daily Beast, joining us, I think, somewhere. Christopher, good to see you. Looking great. Here in the studio, Reggie Sasome, associate editor of the editor-in-chief, no less, of Parimatch. Great to see you, sir.
Good to be here.
Anna Navarro Pedro is the Paris correspondent of Visual magazine. Nice to see you again. And Alyssa Rubin, Paris bureau chief of the New York Times. Thank you for being with us. Now, then, let's begin with our first topic. Brett Kavanaugh's past continues to be a present problem. He's accused of a sexual assault on a 15-year-old girl when he was 17. His accuser, who's now a professor, has been getting death threats since going public. Will she, won't she testify against Kavanaugh before the Senate? Donald Trump says they should just get on with it. He means by that appointing Kavanaugh, his choice for the Supreme Court. What does all this say about the United States? Let's go to the United States to start and bring in Christopher Dickey, who's awaiting us in New York. Christopher, what's your take on what's happening? What's the latest you can tell us?
Well, I think that probably the woman in question will testify next week. They're negotiating right now. They've been playing, both sides have been playing a lot of games. I think she has to justify to the public, in a public forum, the accusations she's made. And if she does it well, if she's attacked in a scurrilous way by the 11 Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee, that will only hurt the Republican Party. On the other hand, I think that psychologically it's going to be extremely difficult for her. She didn't want to go public with this. She was reluctant about it from the start, and now her life has been turned upside down.
And the issue of death threats, the fact that, of course, her life won't be the same now, will it?
No, and Kavanaugh is getting death threats too. It's an indication of just how badly and bitterly divided this country is.
Alyssa.
I think it'll be very closely watched, but especially by women. And I think particularly that will govern a lot about how people think about their vote for members of Congress, be that in the House or the Senate. I also think it is been very difficult to accept a total denial from Brett Kavanaugh for a lot of women who know people who might have denied doing something to them in just the same way. It's perhaps he, in fact, didn't do anything. We don't know. There's all kinds of stories and allegations. But the fact is that he said some things that are very categorical and that therefore raise questions. He not only, as I recall, he said that he wasn't at the party in question, so it couldn't possibly have happened. Well, personally, and maybe, do you remember the parties you went to in high school?
I don't remember them. Unfortunately, the internet wasn't around at the time, so there's no evidence. So that's one thing I'm glad to say.
But would you remember the parties you didn't go to?
Probably not, to be honest. I mean,
Yes.
this is the thing. I mean, it's all a blur, that era.
And it's 36 years old.
That's the thing, isn't it?
It's a long
time ago.
And so one does wonder, and it's possible he blocked it out. It's possible it never happened. But I think in the end, this is a test of how the Senate responds to it. It's not only about him.
I mean,
no, and it has been answering already in a very poor way regarding women, because it seems like an old boys club saying, "Oh, she's mixed up." I believe that's one of the arguments they've used. She doesn't remember well. And they've dismissed her, and they have diminished her statements and her as a witness right from the beginning. Now, you could have done that if you, looking at what she said and the accusation she put forward, you said, well, this doesn't hold.
Right.
Doesn't stand a test right from the beginning. Let's not go that way. It does seem to be, like a diversion move by the Democrats in order to block the judge's nomination. But in reality, if you look at the whole path, actually she spoke about it like in 2012, like 6 years ago. She could not have foreseen that 6 years later she would be using it against this man. So it does seem to have concrete basis strong enough to put the FBI enlarging its vetting inquiry on the judge's past. And they've dismissed it for political reasons, for ideological reasons, and dare I say, for male chauvinistic reasons.
Regis.
No, when you look at the reaction of Donald Trump today, because he tweeted about the case and he said he openly accused, went on after the accuser, saying that if it would have happened, she would have filed with the FBI at the time.
If it had been as bad as she said, why wasn't the FBI called? That was what it was about, wasn't it?
And there's another thing in this story that is even murkier, is the fact that another classmate stepped in and said he knew that the guy who went after this woman was not Kavanaugh, but was another guy. So it's getting mixed up. And, you know, when you have a bad story, the ideal is to create a story within the story.
In the year of fake news.
Yeah, and so at the end of the day, I don't know if this will come anyway, and if she will have the guts to testify, which will, obviously she won't be doing it Monday. Her lawyer said it, but maybe later in the week. So
we're in the business of hearing the truth, aren't we? So let's hope the truth does eventually come out. Alyssa.
I think it will be hard for the Senate to say we have to have it Monday, it can't be Wednesday, because arguably even if they want to vote him out, which they do before the Supreme Court term begins, which is right at the beginning of October, they really can't quibble about one day or another. They can still get the vote done. I mean, my God, they could do it on Sunday night and he could be on the court. I mean, this is one of the most important jobs in the United States. And lasts a lot longer than the presidency.
And it's easy to say, isn't it, that it's something that happens in someone's past, you should forget about it in some way. Now, I'm not saying we should. If he's done what I've read he's alleged to have done, then he should be punished, in my opinion. But isn't the issue that as a judge, and in this lifetime appointment that you've just told us about, his values, his core beliefs, and who he is influences how he acts.
Well, and his honesty as well, and perhaps people should get second chances. But it's striking that elites in the United States. He went to the best schools. He's obviously very accomplished, and he's white. Get second chances. Would he give that same second chance, as someone wrote on Slate, Jamal Bowie, if he were a black teenager in that situation?
I think we know the answer to that question. Christopher Dickey, I sense, wants to speak.
Well, I think Alicia has put her finger on it and then sort of passed by. There's a real question about Kavanaugh's honesty here. As Alicia said, he was categorical, saying, I wasn't there, it never happened, and so on. We will probably never know if it happened exactly the way that the accuser says it happened, but that he may have been at the party, that he was in the room, all that is capable of proof because there were other people at the party, including one of his best friends who supposedly was in the room when the event took place, who says he can't remember but hasn't said that under oath. Getting at the question of whether Kavanaugh is telling the truth is very important because there are other examples where he seems not to have been very truthful. Senator Leahy presented a lot of them earlier in the hearings. So I think that that is a real question for a Supreme Court justice. But of course, the other critical Supreme Court justice question is whether he's going to be voting on the future of Roe versus Wade, basically the court ruling that allowed abortions in the United States. And a lot of people voted for Trump so he could pack the Supreme Court, so that Roe versus Wade could be overturned. And it's very likely that Kavanaugh would vote to overturn it, even though he equivocated and said he couldn't talk about hypotheticals earlier in the hearings. So it is hard to overstate the momentousness of this appointment. And it's being trivialized, in fact, by the Republicans by saying we got to get it done tomorrow, next day, next day. This after they waited months and months and months and months and never gave a hearing to Obama's pick for the Supreme Court when Obama was president.
Clearly, we can see the political wheels not working there and being blocked and then being loosened and oiled when they need to be. Christopher, thank you very much indeed. Just coming back to you, Anna, from what Christopher was saying, and you said it already, this is laced with misogyny, woman-hating, the whole thing.
Yes, and that is a big issue in American society right now, like in the world in general, but in American society. And if I have only 10 seconds, but Kavanaugh has, there is a story that is really telling. When he was a judge, I believe in Texas, I'm not sure, there was this girl, minor immigrant. She was pregnant, she wanted an abortion. She was in a center for migrants. She was prevented physically from leaving the center to make an abortion. She had lawyers who helped her and got all the papers, all the permissions for her to do it. So they went to court, and who was the judge? Kavanaugh. And they wanted him to say that she could leave the center and do the abortion. And the only question Kavanaugh had in this case was when, how long does it take yet, or when is it legally impossible for her to do an abortion, 20 weeks pregnancy. When was the, and he decided a set of measures that would go beyond the legal limit for abortion to that girl. The lawyers fought back, they won, the girl managed to get this abortion, who apparently was after a rape or something like that. But this is the man that is going, it's a sleazy attitude. And it's really anti-woman and anti... And there was one senator asked him, do you know any law in the United States that gives the government control of the male body as they want to have control of the female body? And he wouldn't answer the question. So...
Well, that no such law exists anywhere, does it?
No, not anywhere in the world.
This is the issue, isn't it, Reggie? So obviously, that there is one way of treating men, one way of treating women, and certain people believe and certain people aren't. And it's based on their sex or their colour.
Yeah, that's a bigger issue. I don't know if I'm, but what I was added to this whole is that this guy is the nominee for the Supreme Court. So, it's not like nominee for a Secretary of State or something, where is somebody. You have to be impeccable in terms of what you did in the past. You can't, fool people around with having acted like this way in the past and asking to be the at the Supreme Court. It has a moral impact, and I think that's something that that could easily destroy him coming next week with when the nominees come.
And I think there's a risk of not kind of understanding what it is in his past, because it's not just something. I mean, we're not going into the detail. It's not just something like a little childish error. I mean, this is something pretty grim he's accused of doing.
Absolutely.
To speak up in defense of Judge Kavanaugh from a different point of view, if this were someone else, and I think one would want to ask the question is not whether it's true. People do stupid things in their youth, and they become wonderful and laudable citizens who contribute a great deal to their society, including elected ones, including judges. The question is there a way he can demonstrate that he learned from it? Yes. And I think that is what is not clear. Perhaps if he testifies again, he could make that clear. I don't know. But to me, as someone watching it, I don't want to condemn someone, having made plenty of mistakes myself and knowing many people who did, who then go on to do good things.
I think it's a very fair assessment of this completely. Christopher Dickey, are you convinced in any way that Brett Kavanaugh has learnt from his errors, alleged errors?
Well, he doesn't admit the errors, so how could he have learned from them? But also, you have to know that here in the States, there are constant television ads now running talking about what a wonderful person he is. And there's a woman on the air who says she's known him for 30 years and he's the most upstanding guy, and he'll be a great Supreme Court justice, and he's full of empathy, and so on and so on. And every time I see that ad, it occurs to me that we can know something about people who are upstanding in their public life, and maybe even people who are upstanding in their private life, but we never know a damn thing about their sex life. And in fact, it sounds very much, the endorsements of him sound very much like what parishioners say about their priests who are being indicted for all kinds of sexual crimes. I'm not saying that that's the case with Kavanaugh, but I would say that if he committed any kind of error like this, or crime like this, or assault like this, and he refuses to admit it, then clearly he hasn't learned a damn thing from it.
Would anybody here feel comfortable with what we know so far about having this man as a judge on the Supreme Court?
I'd like to know more. But so far, I have a negative feeling about his workings as a judge.
I'm getting that loudly and clear from what you said earlier about the case in Texas as well. Alisa, in terms of what this now means, what this means for the US?
What it means for the US, I think it's important for people to hear more and to hear it in as fair a way as possible.
Regis?
Let's see what the FBI has to say about it, because they're conducting an investigation right now. So, I mean, they'll probably come to conclusion, and we'll see what they have to say, and then we can maybe know more and see if he is the right pitch for the Supreme Court.
Indeed. Thank you very much, indeed. That concludes this first part of The World This Week. Stay with us. More to come very shortly. Welcome back to The World This Week. Our panel's revved up and ready to go. We'll go straight into our next story. North and South Korea basically on message on the issue of denuclearization now. Kim Jong-un, or Rocket Man to Donald Trump, says that he now wants a non-nuclear Korean peninsula. Moon Jae-in wants a treaty to end officially the Korean War. There they are. Hands together, united and lifted in some kind of victorious gesture. But are there genuine reasons to be cheerful here? Let's put that to our panel and start with Christopher in New York. What's the feeling, Christopher? Are we seeing positives, genuine positives from Korea?
Well, it's a little bit more positive than it was even a few days ago, but only a little bit. And it all fits into what's been a pretty clear North Korean strategy, which is to divide South Korea from Washington on a couple of issues. One of the key issues is the peace treaty. If you have a peace treaty, if you say the war is absolutely over, then obviously the next thing that Kim Jong-un does is say, so why do you need 28,000 or 45,000 or whatever the number is of American troops in South Korea? Why don't you just take those out? It's all part of the Bringing Peace to the Peninsula program. At the same time, while he's talking about denuclearization, shutting down the Yongbyon reactor and taking out some of the missile test sites, he's saying that he'll do that in reciprocation, or if there is reciprocation, in a staged program of building confidence measures, basically, which is exactly what we've seen many times with North Korea in the past, and eventually it falls apart because ultimately the confidence isn't there. So I think there isn't a lot of enthusiasm on the part even of Trump's closest advisors, but they are very concerned that there will be a new summit between Trump and Kim, and that just as in the last summit, Trump will get all excited about it and give things away that can't be taken back. For instance, in the last one, he just unilaterally said he would stop the military exercises that used to be part of the program. At the same time, things are going very badly with China, as Trump keeps ratcheting up sanctions on China, with new ones now because it was buying warplanes from Russia. And as a result, the ability to count on Beijing to help with the Korean peninsula issue and denuclearization, that ability is diminishing by the day.
So Christopher Dickey, not convinced by the hands lifted with Kim and Moon together, Regis. What was your reaction when you saw that image?
Well, it's been, we've seen many images coming and many steps taken by North Korea. Look at the recent 70th commemorations of the creation of North Korea. They refrained themselves from putting the ballistic missiles in front of the parades. In order, that was a sort of gesture it made it in, to say, we're down, we're not threatening anymore. We're not, and the speech was much less, hard than it had been in the past years or whenever there was this kind of commemoration. So obviously North Korea is trying to work that past they have not changed anything on their nuclear. They have not dismantled anything. They are, and that's the problem with the Trump administration, because Trump has been trumpeting that he reached an agreement and that North Korea will fully denuclearize, and that has not happened yet. But still, you see that recently the foreign minister Ri Yong-ho, which is of North Korea, has been invited to New York by Secretary of State Pompeo. So there is still hope that the U.S. can, but as Christopher Dickey clearly said it, those it's not going to fool anyone. Like, North Korea's not given up anything, basically.
And Anna, as Christopher was saying, there's a kind of manipulation been going on for a long time. I'm thinking back to, say, the Winter Olympics, when all of a sudden, Kim declared, "Hey, let's have a joint team." Completely stole the light from South Korea with their Olympic Games.
Instagram diplomacy, right?
Instagram diplomacy. Yeah.
The amazing thing is how much the North Korean leader has been able to get from so little concessions. It's quite amazing. It proves that he has good strategists with him, or that he's a good one, surprisingly, because you'll never guess it from looking at him. But I mean, that is just a silly observation, obviously. As the other panelists, of course there is a manipulation, but of course there is a misunderstanding right from the beginning. Of course he'll never give up, never go along denuclearization, because North Korea believes that if they are at peace, if they haven't been attacked, it's because they have nuclear weapons. They won't give them up.
Otherwise they would have ended up like Gaddafi.
Exactly. That's their analysis. And for instance, for the Trump administration, peace comes from denuclearization. So there is a complete misunderstanding here right from the beginning. And of course, as you said, Trump administration is one thing, Trump is another thing. He's so volatile, so unpredictable as well, in the things that we don't know where we can go from here. But I do admire, in this very unstable setting, the actions of South Korean president, who is really trying to save his country from war.
Indeed, he seems to be the man torn in the middle and changing as the moon changes, no pun intended. Alyssa, in terms of the situation, I mean, clearly it's hard to say which way it's going to go, isn't it?
Well, I think if it stays sort of like this, it'll be the status quo in reality. But except for, as Anna said, the entente between South and North Korea is certainly something that may make South Korea feel a little more confident and a little less vulnerable. But I don't know how South Koreans generally feel about that, and you'd have to know that. But I think the other real problem is that, in a way, Trump has minimized the danger of North Korea, and that but because he's sort of put out this idea that a deal is going on, and he's very good at deals, and if he just has one more meeting, then maybe it'll go to the next step. And in fact, exactly as Chris said, as Regis said, nothing has happened. There's no change in the actual level of danger.
And also, to go beyond that, the question of the 20,000 troops being stationed, U.S. troops being stationed, has been pointed out by Trump many times. If you read Bob Woodward's book, when he talks about the many exchange between General Mattis, head of the Pentagon, and Trump about this issue, Trump keeps on saying, why do we need these troops over there? Because it costs money. Trump sees it as a business thing, And I mean, he doesn't really. He said, like you said, he's made a deal with Kim Jong-un, and he thinks Kim Jong-un will hold the deal. That's it. And so he sees those troops as something, absolutely useless in the coming years, because things are going to change, and that's something that's, I mean, Trump is not deciding for everything. And of course, Mattis has been very smart in pointing him that if those troops withdraw, then it would take 15 minutes for the U.S. to know if when the North Korea's launched the rockets. If the troops are there, they will know it by the second. So it's quite still an important issue. especially given the fact that North Korea is not denuclearized or demilitarized anything.
It is a very steep learning curve for the president to go from the type of deals he's used to the different type of deals and the different stakes that are on the table, you know, when dealing with something like North Korea. Let's bring back in Christopher Dickey, who's awaiting us in New York. Christopher, I hope you can hear us now. We can certainly see
yes.
looking good as usual. Now then, what we've been hearing here is that we've had the art of the deal discussed and the fact that Trump may think he's dealing with someone who, you know, will do what's on the table, but in fact it could go any other way that Trump might not expect, basically.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that a big part of the art of the deal in Trump's head is maximum pressure. That's what he thinks he was doing about North Korea, and it did seem to have some impact on Kim Jong-un last year. But since the summit, Kim Jong-un took the measure of Trump and basically seems to think, probably with some reason, that he can make deals with Trump that go over the head of all of Trump's advisors. Because Trump is so arrogant, he thinks he knows much better than any of the people who've been studying North Korea for years. You know, Trump is very animal. He goes with his gut, with his instinct. It served him well in getting elected president, but it doesn't serve him very well in negotiating with someone like Kim Jong-un. And I think that's one of the reasons that Kim Jong-un wants another summit. And repeatedly dismisses Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, although I think now he may have invited him back. But he basically says, we don't have to talk to Mike Pompeo. We don't have to talk to the Secretary of State. Let's cut a deal with Donald Trump. We know how to work with him, and basically they know how to work him.
Yes, I was going to say, who's pulling the strings? And I think you just more or less spelled it out there. Anna, do you see Kim as the puppet master, you know, manipulating?
Definitely, and these
situation.
are times, definitely he's winning, and these are times for leaders like him. Like some time ago, he still was the plague itself in international relations, and in a time of populism and drifting away from democracy, someone like him can, you know, be almost a hero going on Singapore by night and being waved by people. Probably misses another meeting as well in Singapore, another stroll on the streets of Singapore at night, and definitely manipulating, as Chris said, definitely manipulating Trump.
So behind the smiles and the handshakes, reasons to be a little bit suspicious about what might happen next. Let's move on. A ground invasion has been avoided, we think, in Syria's Idlib province. This came after a deal announced by Russia and Turkey. The rebels under this deal will move out of Idlib by next month. The UN was warning of a humanitarian disaster in Idlib, the last rebel-held enclave in Syria, but Putin and Erdogan sorted it out, and then they told Assad and the rebels afterwards, and fortunately they went along with it. But the situation, as complicated as ever, and Regis Le Sommier, do you think this will hold together? Do you think this will bring us towards a solution, or will it just open up another Pandora's box of problems?
Well, it's a tricky question. Everybody was surprised to see that Russia and Turkey namely Erdogan and Putin, were able to pull out this deal. It was mainly expected that the SA, the Syrian Arab Army, would start its long time announced invasion of Idlib. The problem is Idlib has been the receptacle of every single rebel groups in Syria that decided to keep on fighting against the Syrian army. So from basically the end of Aleppo, the eastern Aleppo enclaves in December of 2016, every rebel that wanted to keep fighting went to Idlib. So there's a huge amount of fighters over there. A lot of them are jihadist groups, including foreign fighters, people from the Islamic Turkestan party, which are the Uyghur, the Chinese jihadists. You have the faction, the Katiba of Omar Hamsen, who's a French citizen from Nice, who has his own little army over there, and many, many others. The main groups that is holding Idlib, the province of Idlib right now, is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which used to be Al-Qaeda, but sided away from Al-Qaeda. Nusra, but Al-Qaeda. So you have all these various groups. Right now, some groups have said they will go with the agreement. Some groups have openly said they won't. But before October, mid-October, what the agreement requests is that there's a band strip, sort of no-go zone that is operated by the Turkish army and the Russian army that is done all around Idlib. And some of these groups are holding positions, and some have already said they won't give up these positions. So it's a tricky agreement. Will the Russian and the Turkish be able to put it in place? That's a question. Or is it merely a delay for a major offensive we'll see coming in October or November?
It all sounds very apocalyptic, Elisa. Yeah.
Well, I think we almost have to step back a little as well and put Idlib in the larger Syria context, because it's not as if Russia is just looking at that. It did agree to broker this with Turkey. It has some reasons for courting Turkey now that there's more tensions between Turkey and the United States. Or further courting it. But I think if you look where the Syrian army, the government's forces are and what they might be interested in, they could well, with the help of Russia, either probably not overtly, but in a more covert way, turn towards the other rebels they don't like, which are the American-backed rebels who are in the north and along the eastern border where there was ISIS. They have a very good excuse for being there. They're getting rid of the tail end, the remnants, or whatever you want to say, of the Islamic State. But we know they're never just remnants.
Is this the YPG?
Well, this is the YPG, and it's also other sort of Syrian democratic forces, which include YPG. And certainly Turkey wouldn't object. They don't like the YPG. They view them as part of their of the group that is really synonymous with their Turkish Kurds. And I've seen quite a bit of analysis looking at where there have been sort of preliminary movements in the direction of north and that part of eastern Turkey down around of Syria near Deir ez-Zor.
Sure.
So I think we have to look at the whole picture, and the whole thing is still just terribly dangerous.
Like you're saying, you take that step back, you see that there are so many different layers,
different fronts. Really.
Yeah, it's all very volatile. Anna,
but on a different level, going further back still, who was on the press conference in the end? Who was around the table? Only Russia and only Turkey, not the Syrian officers. Well, they were there but not as actors, and not the Americans and not the Europeans. And this also indicates that Bashar al-Assad has outsourced many of the state's tasks to some groups, allies inside Syria, in order to win this civil war. And he also has outsourced the ultimate state power, which is the monopoly of violence. He doesn't have it anymore. And then we can see that regarding, yes, because that's the definition by Max Weber, you know.
It's debatable.
You can agree with it or not.
If the offensive happened, it would be made by the Syrian army. It would not be.
Yes, but I mean, in the whole of Syria is not the only one to use.
In a second, Christopher. In a second. Go ahead, Christopher. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, we had very good reporting from there in the last couple of weeks. And we were some of the first to report that the Syrian army didn't have enough troops, even remotely enough troops, deployed in the region to carry out the offensive that it was talking about. It had about 25,000 troops.
I mean,
that's one issue.
The Syrian army did Idlib, they did Aleppo, they did Lahuta, they did Dera. Okay,
no,
they are not alone. They have the help of tribes. They have the help of militias.
It's maybe a bigger thing, but it's been the constant narrative we've been hearing about the Syrian army. It's lack of man. But with the help of Russian, they've been able to gain back 60% of their territory. So that's a fact. Okay, you can argue that they don't have enough troops. They are doing it.
You're not mentioning Hezbollah. You're not mentioning Iran.
Of course, I'm mentioning those. I don't deny the existence of this. But stop. It doesn't change anything by saying the Syrian troop does not have troops.
I don't know why you're. I don't know why you're beating this horse, Régis.
No, but.
I'm sorry, we are not saying that.
This is the constant narrative we've been hearing, and what at the end of the day, they're gaining territory. They've confronted ISIS.
They're not gaining territory.
This has slided sideways, and it's not the purpose of my intervention and not the purpose of our discussion.
Anna, pick up where you left off, please.
We can have different points of views if there are several helps to the Syrian army or not, whether it is still monopoly or not, whatever. It's not the purpose. The fact is that the state is not the Syrian state, and Bashar al-Assad is not the main actor in the Syrian conflict anymore. Russia and Turkey now are main actors, and they don't have any...
Iran. And Iran.
And Iran. I'm looking there because I was thinking I could see it.
I don't know why there's this reluctance to admit this. And don't cut me off again, Régis. I can't see you. But I can tell you that Iran basically backed away from the Idlib offensive. And that is one reason
so why are we talking about Iran? We're talking about Idlib. Why are we talking about Iran if you just said it backed away from the Idlib offensive?
There you are cutting me off again, Régis. Yeah, exactly. And once Iran backed away from the Idlib offensive, the Syrian army didn't have the resources to carry it out by itself.
Of course, you know the Syrian army because, you know, you've got all the information. You know exactly where they are. You know where they're stationed. You've been to Syria many times.
I think we do know a lot about where. I think we do know a lot about where they are. Régis.
So what do you know?
But we also know. Well, we know that the offensive didn't happen for starters.
It was about to happen. We know every observer, clear observer was saying. Without this agreement, it was going to happen, and it might be delayed by a month or two.
Why did the agreement take place? Why did the agreement take place? Why didn't they just move ahead? They didn't move ahead because they didn't have the resources to do it. And I think that we're leaving out one other element.
That's totally your interpretation.
It's not only Chris' interpretation, I'm afraid. It is a lot of observers on the field.
You've been saying the same thing over and over, and things are changing in Syria, and the war is almost over.
Okay, Régis. Okay.
Well, then stop talking. I mean, if you're being very...
Régis.
Final word on this one from Christopher, and then we'll move on.
You have cut me off so many times, Régis.
Christopher, go ahead. I'll keep things clear.
The question of the lack of resources was also why people were in such a panic about the question of the use of chemical weapons. Because typically when the Syrians have felt under a lot of pressure or under-resourced, they have tried to use chemical weapons, either chlorine or worse chemical weapons. And that's why you saw so many dramatic warnings. It's also why you saw the Russians going to the OPCW, the Chemical Weapons Watchdog Group, and trying to warn that the rebels were going to use chemical weapons because it was an obvious effort to cover up
some rebel groups, I'm afraid,
Christopher,
have used chemical weapons. Jaish al-Islam, October 2016 in Aleppo. It's been reported, and many times ISIS has done it also.
Okay. Final word on this one from Anna, and then we'll move on.
Okay, the interesting thing, getting away from all the details, is the fact that this shift in international relations, in geostrategy, geopolitics, where United States, Europe is completely out of a broker deal in the Middle East. Okay, great. We agree.
No. We don't necessarily disagree with it.
I think the other thing that's noticeable, building on what you're saying, is that it is possible for the Russians to have considerable latitude in what they do because they know that President Trump will not call them on it or reproach them for it. He doesn't want to be involved in Syria. He's never engaged as much. It's always been General Mattis and the Pentagon, which has seen all the implications. But I think that the Russians have a lot of latitude to make any number of decisions, and as does Iran, working through the Russians.
Once again, Putin holding the best hand, it seems, in this particular game of nasty poker. Let's move on quickly to talk about Brexit, because that's what I want to do. These guys could talk Syria all day. The Gang of 28, otherwise known as the European Union, had that summit in Salzburg. There was, little harmony in the sound of music, or the home of the sound of music, more or less. The hills alive with the sound of Brexit. And I think Theresa May, there she is, certainly in a big problematic area. Christopher, what would you say? Can she survive this? Will she still be leader of the Tory party and Prime Minister going forward, do you think?
I honestly don't know. She seemed to teeter on the brink of falling for so long and on this specific issue, and still she manages to survive. But clearly, Britain is in disarray, and the European Union is standing firm. So I don't see how she can last much longer, but it isn't clear to me exactly how she could be replaced in a way that would resolve the Brexit issue to the satisfaction of almost anybody.
Regis.
Well, it's it's a status quo. I mean, nothing has come out of this summit. I mean, let's look at
absolutely nothing.
There's there's been warnings on both parts. And Theresa May has held her ground. She said, and basically, you kind of wonder why this summit are made. With the Europe.
It's like a vinyl record stuck in the same groove, isn't it? I hear the same things all the time. It's really disparaging.
And even on the migration issue, I mean, nothing has been clearly decided. I mean, there's been some.
Well, no, I think that's right. Nothing has been clearly decided, but this was just my very naive reading of it, because I don't follow these summits with great. I get bored partway through often because there is so little change. But it does seem that all of the discussion about a more shared migration policy has moved further and further and farther away. And actually what has happened is that more and more Europeans seem willing to outsource some of the more distasteful parts, such as allowing the Egyptians to basically pick people up and move them back to Africa, and sort of regardless of their condition, regardless of whether they might qualify for asylum. And as we know, some people do, some people don't, but that's a decision made later. So to me, almost we're moving away from the ideas that certainly Angela Merkel and also to some extent Macron were talking about in terms of coming up with a more shared and sort of just policy within the EU.
And the issue of migration, I think, is the one, Anna, where it says the EU has failed, hasn't it? I mean, not being able to find a solution. You think this would be the one where they could actually show, look, this is a solution. We work as a 28-nation team.
It's the big problem coming up in the European elections next year. And it's the big fight within the European Union. Right now, in a more velvety way, if you want, it can get very rough in the months ahead. And it's a real test for democracy, for our values, in European values, and for our future, I believe. But going back to Brexit and Theresa May, I think there is a lot going on, actually, in there, because maybe by creating a crisis nearing the time, which is March 29th, I believe, when UK may leave European Union without any deal whatsoever, but still stepping into a transition period. So let's watch it. There is creating a crisis so near the end. It might bring people both sides into focus. Focus,
yes.
To reach a deal. Secondly, Theresa May's weakness, political weakness at home, it's a leverage to the European Union, because if she falls and we have to deal with Boris Johnson, let's say,
or Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, yes,
if there's an election,
Boris Johnson will be worse. We don't want that in Europe.
I need to pause you. Brexit sounds like a mess. I'm going to get a French passport. Thank you very much indeed, Ana Navarro Pedro from Visiao. Thanks to Regis Sommet from Paramatch. Thanks to Lisa Rudman from the New York Times. And thanks to Christopher Dickey joining us there from his perch in New York. Great to see you, sir. This has been The World This Week. Thanks for joining us. Stay with us. More to come here on France 24.